Hi, I am author Erin Soderbergh Downing, and I am so excited to share the first chapter of the last book in the Great Peach Experiment series, Duck, Duck, Peach. Now, please know you can read these books in any order, so if you're a huge fan of large rubber ducks, feel free to start here and then head backward in the series. Okay, so this one starts out on Tuesday. 3 sleeps until summer break. Chapter 1, The World's Largest Rubber Duck. Hello? Lucy Peach hollered as she threw open the back door of her family's enormous mansion after school. Who's home? I'm in here, a voice called back to her from the front hall. Lucy followed the voice through the kitchen, into and past the dining room, and toward the front entryway. There she found Theo, the 20-something aged guy who'd been hired to help manage the family's B&B during the day while Dad was at work and the 3 Peach kids were at school. Hey, Luce, Theo said, using his hand to cover the mouthpiece of an old-fashioned telephone that was hanging from the wall in the mansion's front hallway. Just finishing up this call. Hold on a sec. Theo wrapped up his phone conversation with a quick, Great, wonderful, we'll see you at the Peachtree B&B soon. Safe travels. Then he hung up and offered Lucy a fist bump. Here's the phone. Peach, did we get some more new bookings today? Lucy asked hopefully. 6, Theo answered with a grin. 6 new reservations, 2 actual phone calls, and 4 online requests. 13-year-old Lucy clapped her hands and flipped open the guest register. They kept their reservation system on a computer, but Lucy had insisted they also track their guest room bookings in a fancy paper registry too. Given the age of their house, the mansion was more than 100 years old and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It felt more fitting to partially run their business the old-fashioned way. In fact, the house was so old that it also had an ancient intercom system that connected each of the guest rooms with the kitchen. There was a hidden staircase that was once used by servants but now used by Lucy alone. And some books on their living room shelves were more than 50 years old. She scanned the paper registry and wasn't surprised to see that the B&B's first ever full week of reservations was the following week, during the first week of summer break. Just as soon as school let out for the year, Duluth, which was a medium-sized city on the very western tip of Lake Superior, would be the host town for the first ever Great Lakes Festival of Ships. More than 50 ships of all kind would be sailing into the Peaches' hometown harbor, and people would be allowed to tour many of them and take rides out onto the lake while also enjoying all the other fun things Duluth had to offer in the summertime. The city's downtown businesses would be staying open late for shopping and browsing during the festival, and many restaurants in town had evening music and entertainment planned. Lucy's youngest brother, Herb, who was 9, and the Peach Kids' great-aunt Lucinda had been working together to organize a food truck event next to the lakefront during the festival, and there were all kinds of other fun activities going on in town next week as well. Thousands of visitors would be flooding into town to see all the unique ships and boats from all over the world. Pirate ships, tall sailboats, small tugboats, a massive super yacht, snazzy speedboats, iron ore carriers, and more. Many of the boats would be coming into Duluth Harbor from the Atlantic Ocean by following a watery channel that wound all the way through each of the 5 Great Lakes. Here is Freddie's sketch of what that waterway looks like. But the ice cream on top of the pie was the Festival of Ships' unofficial mascot, something truly unique that had been built specifically for this event, the world's largest rubber duck. Some guy from Duluth had created a massive rubber duck that was rumored to be the size of a house. This duck would slide into the water for the very first time ever during the opening ceremony of the Festival of Ships that Friday evening. Lucy couldn't wait to see that giant duck floating around in the lake, but she knew her other brother, 11-year-old Freddie, was even more excited. The previous summer, the Peach family had traveled around the country in a used food truck on a quest to win the Ohio Food Truck Festival. During that road trip adventure, Freddie had worked hard to build their family business selling pies, but he'd also been very focused on seeing as many strange and wonderful sights along the way as possible. Freddie loved all kinds of random facts and strange off-the-beaten-path attractions, and having something so unique and one of a kind floating around in their very own hometown harbor was something truly special that Freddie hadn't stopped talking about for weeks. I can't believe all three of our guest rooms are totally full for the Festival of Ships, Lucy said, looking up at Theo with wide eyes from the guest register. Lucy loved living in her great aunt Lucinda's old peach pit, the nickname Freddie had given the ramshackle old mansion. But the house was so large that sometimes Lucy worried that it didn't make much sense for their family of four, plus four naughty dogs, to be rattling around in a house this big when they so rarely had paying guests. But finally, their registration book was filling up, and now they could truly get down to business. And we're also already full for 6 other weeks this summer. We've never been booked solid ever, let alone for multiple weeks in the same month. It's pretty rad, Theo agreed. Oof, I have a lot to do to get everything ready before all these people show up, Lucy said, feeling a nervous pit start to form in her stomach. She wanted everything to be just so for their guests. Right then, she heard the back door off the kitchen swing open and then slam shut. This was a sign that both Freddie and Herb had arrived home from school. Lucy heard the crackly patter of little dog toenails scrambling across the hardwood floors as the family's pack of small pups ran to greet their best human friend, Herb. Lucy's youngest brother was great with the dogs, and he'd spent the past 9 months working with these four on their behavior. He had made some progress with his training, but the dogs were still little terrors most of the time. Luckily, they were also very charming and had mastered sweet puppy dog eyes, which helped make up for some of the trouble they caused far too often. However, Lucy noted, they hadn't even bothered to wake up and say hi when she'd gotten home. It was obvious who the dog's favorite peach was. Heads up, I made cinnamon monkey bread today, Theo told Lucy, nodding toward the kitchen. Theo, who often felt more like an older brother than an employee, was an amazing baker, and he was always a huge help when it came time to prepare their B&B breakfast offerings. His cinnamon monkey bread was Lucy's all-time favorite. You better run before those two beasts eat it all. Lucy could hear cabinets swinging open and shut in the kitchen and guessed her brothers were probably already hunting for snacks. It wouldn't take long before they found the monkey bread and devoured it all. No good food stuck around for long in their house. Lucy slammed the guest registry closed and rushed toward the kitchen. Hey, listen, Luce, I've got to talk to your dad about something as soon as he gets home from work, Theo said, trailing behind as Lucy pushed open the swinging door between the dining room and the living room and hustled toward the kitchen. I've got this friend of a friend who's coming to Duluth for the Festival of Ships, and, well, it turns out he didn't book a place to stay before all the cheap local hotels and campgrounds and stuff filled up. He's going to be performing as a magician in Canal Park all next week, so he really needs a place to stay, somewhere right here in town, and I'm hoping Walter might let him set up a tent in the backyard. Freddie's face popped out of the butler's pantry where they kept their snacks, and he said, Hang on, Theo. This friend, who just happens to be a real live magician, wants to sleep in a tent in our backyard. Yup, Theo said, as if this were a perfectly ordinary request. In Theo's world, maybe this was an ordinary request. Frankly, in the Peaches' world, so many strange and extraordinary things had happened to them over the past year that this wasn't a particularly shocking thing to hear someone ask. You think Walter will go for the idea? The backyard is huge, Herb pointed out, his greenish-brown speckled eyes wide. We'd probably have room for like 10 tents if we wanted to turn the yard into a campground sometime. He shrugged from his spot on the floor where he was wrestling the dogs. Lucy laughed. The image of their tree-filled backyard stuffed with tents was somehow hilarious. The backyard was already filled with little piles of dog poop and had also recently become home to Freddie's newly built, homemade mini golf course. The holes for the course were actually holes dug by the dogs, which Freddie had decided might as well be put to good use for something fun. The mansion had a beautiful wild space out back, but the last thing they needed was to try to run a B&B and a campground. Their lives had been nutty enough, running just the B&B alone. Would this magic guy pay us money to stay in a tent out back? Freddie piped up. Maybe we could charge him like $30 a night and throw in free breakfast, Theo suggested. Herb scratched his head, then scrambled to standing. That seems fair. Just as he said it, Herb finally spotted the monkey bread on the counter and dove for it, but not before Lucy had a chance to pull off a huge chunk for herself. Okay, Theo said, we can all present the idea to Walter when he gets home, but it sounds like you guys are on board with the idea. If you're all in, I bet your dad will go for it too. Sounds great to me, Freddie agreed. Lucy was pretty sure their dad would be willing to let someone put up a tent in the backyard, but sometimes it was hard to predict Dad's reaction to stuff. Their dad was a scientist. He worked at the local university doing climate research and was also a professor who taught a lot of college students science stuff. And he had a certain way of doing things, and there were certain ways he liked things being done. Walter Peach wasn't always a go with the flow kind of guy, but since he knew their hometown was going to be busy for the Festival of Ships the following week, he was probably expecting a little chaos. She hoped he was anyway, since their house was going to be full and life was about to get much crazier than usual. While her brothers got to work on their end-of-year homework and projects and continued to dig up more snacks in the kitchen, Lucy raced upstairs to survey their collection of guest rooms to see what would need to get done before people began to arrive in town for the Festival of Ships. They had 3 guest suites at the Peachtree B&B, and Lucy loved each one for a different reason. But her absolute favorite guest room was the one she herself had designed, the Winter Suite, which was decorated to look like a winter wonderland all year long. Before the Peaches had moved into the mansion, the house and dogs had belonged to their great-aunt Lucinda, whose favorite holiday was Christmas. In fact, she loved Christmas so much that she'd even named her 4 little treasures, aka the dogs, after 4 of Santa's reindeer, Dasher, Rudolph, Donner, and Vixen. The rooms were all fairly tidy and each had fresh sheets on the bed, but every guest suite smelled a little stale, and in 2 of them a fine layer of dust had settled over the dressers, desks, and bed frames. The Peaches kept all the guest room doors closed when no one was staying there, so the dogs couldn't sneak in and leave any smelly or wet treasures of their own on the floors or beds in the guest suites. Dog messes were not exactly a warm way to welcome visitors to a bed and breakfast. Lucy quickly dusted each of the rooms and took an inventory of some of the things that would be needed for their guests. They'd have to get more shampoo and probably make welcome baskets with local snacks and drinks. And maybe she could even leave a little rubber duck on each pillow in the guest rooms to celebrate the reason they were all in town, the Festival of Ships and the introduction of the world's largest rubber duck. For the first time in her life, Lucy was actually excited to see the school year come to an end. As much as she'd loved 7th grade, she couldn't wait to see what the first week of summer would bring, with a full house for the first time ever and all kinds of interesting people in town for such a unique event. After a topsy-turvy couple of years filled with fun trips and unusual family experiments, this summer would certainly set the stage for the next chapter in the Peaches' lives, as their family worked hard to settle into something a little closer to normal. That is, as normal as life could be, with the world's largest rubber duck bobbing around in the harbor down the hill, Herb and Great-Aunt Lucinda's food truck event to look forward to, a lake packed full of strange and unique ships, a magician lurking around in the backyard, a house full of naughty dogs, and a family like the Peaches, whose definition of normal usually tended to be just a bit different from the rest of the world's. And then this chapter ends with a lovely and delicious recipe for Theo's cinnamon monkey bread, invented and written up by my daughter Milla in our kitchen. So I hope people love this culmination to the Peach series. I love it. It's my love letter to my hometown of Duluth, Minnesota. The world's largest rubber duck is a thing that actually exists and was created by a guy from Duluth, Minnesota. So meet it here in this book, and then you can visit it maybe in a waterway near you. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you love this book.